Welcome to Learn in Brief, the podcast from White Coats Hackers, designed specifically for those of you navigating the exciting intersection of digital health, biotech, and biomedical innovation.
Great to be diving in.
So today we're tackling a really pivotal question, I think, for our sectors. Why do biomedical companies still seem, well, hesitant maybe, to fully embrace open source?
Absolutely. And this isn't just, a simple coding preference debate.
No, not at all.
It really gets to the heart of how this whole industry operates. We're talking fundamental systems, culture.
Exactly. So our goal in this deep dive is to really unpack those reasons, the structural, the cultural, and definitely the regulatory factors behind this resistance.
Sounds good.
So where do we start? What's the first layer we need to peel back here?
I think a really significant factor, maybe the biggest, is the fragmented regulatory environment.
Fragmented? How so?
Well, unlike some other tech areas, healthcare software isn't overseen by just one global authority. Every country practically has its own rules.
Right. You've got the FDA in the US, obviously.
Yep. And Germany's BfArM. Turkey has TİTCK. The list goes on.
It's a complex web.
It really is. And, these regulatory bodies, quite rightly, place a huge emphasis on the thorough validation of any software updates.
Especially if it's in a medical device or impacts patient care directly, I imagine.
Precisely. Every single change needs rigorous scrutiny, documentation, proof.
Okay, that sounds sensible, obviously. But where does the friction come in with open source?
Well, open source software is, by its nature, incredibly dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, community-driven, lots of updates.
Exactly. It thrives on community contributions, which means frequent, often rapid updates. And this constant evolution can become, well, one source called it a regulatory nightmare.
A nightmare, wow, why?
Imagine trying to keep pace.
Yeah.
You have to validate every significant change, meet the specific requirements in the US and Germany and Turkey and everywhere else.
Yeah.
For software that might be updated quite often by a global community.
Okay. The sheer volume and speed.
The complexity, the resource drain, it becomes enormous.
So it's not just about the final code being safe, it's the whole traceable development process.
That's a huge part of it. Traceability and auditability.
Can you give us a specific example? How does a regulation actually hit open source in practice?
Sure. So in the United States, the FDA requires proof that software isn't software of unknown provenance. SUP, they call it.
SUP?
Yeah. Essentially, they need to know the origins, the development history of every single bit of software in a medical device.
And with open source.
Well, tracing that lineage in a big project with potentially hundreds of contributors from all over, providing that specific documentation, those assurances, that can be a real challenge.
I can see that. If you don't have one company controlling the whole dev cycle, proving provenance gets tricky. What about the EU side?
Right. The EU's medical device regulation, the MDR, adds another layer. It classifies medical software based on risk level.
Higher risk means more scrutiny.
Much more stringent audits. So if a manufacturer integrates open source components where they don't have, direct oversight of every single development step,
Yeah.
it adds significant complexity to proving compliance and getting through those tough audits.
Yeah.
It's the process, the traceability again, not just the final code.
Okay, wow. Navigating that global regulatory maze definitely sounds like a major reason for hesitation. So beyond regulation, what else is holding companies back?
Another really significant factor is the intense competition, particularly in the health tech startup world.
Competition, okay.
One of our sources actually calls this the selfish startup race.
Selfish. That's quite a term. What's the dynamic there?
Well, in this super competitive space, a lot of startups focus really hard on developing and then fiercely protecting their own proprietary closed systems.
Right, the secret sauce.
Exactly. The thinking is, we need something unique, our unique advantage to attract investors. This idea of exclusivity becomes a massive part of their pitch, their valuation.
I can definitely see the business logic there, from a single company's perspective. But what are the wider effects of that approach on digital health or biotech overall?
Well, the big downside, really, is that it often slows down overall progress. It prevents a stronger, more connected ecosystem from emerging.
How so?
Instead of having all these sort of isolated islands of tech that often don't talk to each other, imagine if there was more collaboration.
Like shared standards?
Shared APIs, yes. So systems could actually communicate. Community-built platforms where people pool expertise. Just a general culture of cooperation instead of purely trying to outdo the next guy.
Right.
This current focus on proprietary systems actively gets in the way of interoperability. And that ultimately doesn't help the healthcare system, and definitely not patients.
Think about patient transfers.
Exactly. If Clinic A system can't easily share records with Clinic B system because they're locked down proprietary platforms, that's a real-world consequence.
So chasing that short-term competitive edge might actually be hindering bigger long-term gains for the whole field.
That's the argument, yes.
Now, the source material also touched on something interesting, the perspective of future healthcare professionals, medical students, nursing students.
Yes, and this is really critical, I think. We're seeing this fantastic wave of enthusiasm among these students for digital health tools. They're keen.
That's great news for the future, surely.
It is. But the challenge they often hit is this wall of technical jargon. It can feel incredibly overwhelming.
Jargon-like?
Oh, the source lists things like Docker, HL7, FHIR, APIs, blockchain hashing, nodes. For a student focused on clinical care, patient interaction,
It's like a different language.
it really can feel like it. And look, they don't need to become software engineers, obviously.
No.
But the sheer volume of unfamiliar tech terms can be really intimidating, even off-putting.
Yeah, like trying to learn advanced cardiology on day one of med school by reading highly specialized research papers.
Exactly. And remember, these students are the future users. They're the doctors, the nurses who will use these digital tools every day.
So if their first taste is confusing or inaccessible,
We risk alienating them. The very people we need to adopt and champion these innovations could be put off before they even really start.
so it's not just about building cool tech. We need to think about how we introduce it, how we talk about it.
Absolutely. We need to simplify how we explain the technical side to clinicians. Focus on the benefits. How does this improve patient outcomes? How does it make their workflow better, easier, not get bogged down in the code details?
So instead of explaining the deep tech of an API,
Maybe just explain it as, the digital plug that lets system A talk to system B securely. Focus on the what it does for you, not the how it works deep dive unless they ask.
right. Okay, so we've got regulations, startup competition, and educating future users. Now, the source brings up a potential path forward, combining blockchain and open source. That sounds intriguing.
It does, doesn't it? And it holds real potential. Blockchain tech offers a pretty compelling approach to some big healthcare challenges, especially around data storage and security.
How so? More secure.
Potentially, yes. Its decentralized nature, the cryptography. It can offer a more secure and, importantly, more transparent way to handle sensitive patient data. Think of it like a shared digital ledger that's really hard to tamper with.
Okay. And where does open source fit in with blockchain here?
Well, the source mentioned a 2023 study in Nature Digital Medicine,
Oh, yeah.
which suggested blockchain could bring significant cost savings, something like 38% less than traditional server setups.
Wow. 38% is huge in healthcare.
It really is. Now, combine that potential efficiency with the collaborative nature of open source, you could drive costs down even further, maybe, and foster more innovation in secure data management. Imagine an open source community building and refining a secure blockchain-based health data platform together.
That's a powerful economic argument. But what about those regulatory hurdles we talked about earlier? Could blockchain help there too?
That's the interesting part, the very nature of blockchain, specifically its immutable audit trail.
Meaning you can't change past records.
Exactly. Every transaction, every data change is permanently recorded and verifiable. This could actually simplify some regulatory reporting
How?
because you have this transparent, unalterable history. It can make it easier for companies to demonstrate compliance, to show auditors exactly what happened when, without relying solely on internal logs that could theoretically be altered.
Huh. So the transparency that might be a challenge for traditional open source and regulation could actually be a benefit when paired with blockchain's inherent auditability. That's clever.
It's a fascinating synergy, yeah. Lower costs, better security, more transparency for sensitive data.
Yeah.
It ticks a lot of boxes.
Okay, looking even further ahead now, the source paints a picture of the future, say 2030, where collaboration and interoperability aren't just nice-to-haves anymore. They're essential.
Yeah, that's the projection. By 2030, we expect to see way more AI in diagnostics, really sophisticated clinical decision support tools, all sorts of digital health innovations becoming mainstream.
And all that tech needs.
Data. Lots of clean, consistent, accessible data. AI systems especially need high-quality data sets to learn effectively and give useful insights.
Which means all the different systems need to be able to share that data seamlessly. Interoperability becomes non-negotiable.
Precisely. For these advanced tools to work properly, all the devices, the software platforms, the data storage across the whole healthcare system, they'll need to communicate fluently, speak the same digital language, as the source puts it.
So those isolated proprietary systems we talked about earlier, they might just become obsolete or ineffective in that future.
That seems like the likely direction, yes. The sheer demand for data exchange and true interoperability will probably become so strong that open standards and more collaborative open approaches become, well, basically unavoidable if you want to keep up and innovate.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Pulling it all together, it really sounds like the resistance to open source in biomedical fields isn't mainly about the tech itself being unworkable.
No, not fundamentally.
It's more this combination of the tricky regulatory landscape, the competitive culture, especially among startups, and maybe this gap in making the tech accessible to the clinicians who will use it.
So that sums it up nicely, I think.
Yeah.
Structural, cultural, regulatory factors. And the positive angle is these aren't impossible barriers.
Right.
More collaboration, better education for clinicians, adopting new tech like blockchain strategically, these can help pave the way.
It really feels like long-term, especially in digital health where things change so fast, open source is moving from maybe a good idea to something more like a fundamental need.
I think that's right. The potential benefits, accelerating innovation, genuine interoperability, better transparency, maybe even easing compliance, they're just becoming too important to ignore as the field matures.
This has been incredibly insightful, really digging into a crucial question for how healthcare tech evolves. So for you, our listener, whether you're in digital health, biotech, or the biomedical space, here's something to ponder. Can open source really thrive given healthcare's unique challenges and opportunities? And maybe more importantly, what practical steps can we collectively take to help it get there?
Great question to leave people with.
We genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this, and please do join us next time for another deep dive right here on Learn in Brief.